Welcome to Harlem by Southwest. I'm your host, Hakeem Bellamy. Now, raise your hand if you've heard the word Renaissance before. Okay, up higher, I can see you. Okay, if you didn't raise your hand, not a problem. I'm gonna help you here in a second. Those of you who did may or may not have heard it right after the word Harlem, as in Harlem, New York. But the Renaissance didn't start there. It started in Florence, Italy, and spread throughout Europe from the 14th to the 17th century. The period of time before the Renaissance was called the Middle Ages. Some would even say the Dark Ages. The darkness ended with the fall of the Roman Empire and then the Renaissance, which literally means rebirth in French. Many of the advances in science, art, and government that had been made by the Greeks and Romans were lost during the Middle Ages. So we told you it was dark, right? So the Renaissance brought in a period of enlightenment. It was a rebirth of education, of science, art, theater, literature, music, and a better life for people in general. So what's that got to do with Harlem, you say? Well, Harlem, New York is roughly 4,153 miles away from Florence. Well, a few centuries later, 3 to be exact, Harlem had its own Renaissance, a Black Renaissance. And similar conditions were at play. The American economy more than doubled between 1920 and 1929. The growth of cities attracted people looking for a more comfortable way of life from the farms. This included black folk, especially black folk from the South, and you know our history with farms in the South. You could say America was coming out of its very own dark ages, also known as slavery. In the wake of Reconstruction and Jim Crow, black people moved north in droves in what was called the Great Migration. By 1970, when the Great Migration ended, over 6 million black people left the South for places like Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, shout out to my hometown, and yep, you guessed it, New York City. The Harlem section of New York City is only 3 square miles. And at the height of the Harlem Renaissance, nearly 175,000 African Americans lived there. It was the most dense concentration of black people in the world at the time. And these black people, well, they had money, just like other people did. And this was in a time called the Roaring Twenties. And that money became its own awakening. Remember, out of the dark. An awakening in fashion, writing, painting, music, and identity. The first African-American Rhodes Scholar and Harlemite, Elaine Locke, described it as a spiritual coming of age. And the artists expressing this new black became household names. Josephine Baker, Paul Robeson, Zora Neale Hurston, Countee Cullen, Aaron Douglas, Augusta Savage, Louis Armstrong, Count Basie, Eubie Black, Cab Calloway, Duke Ellington, Fats Waller, and Billie Holiday. So what's that got to do with New Mexico? Well, other than that some of those artists I just mentioned eventually made their way to a legendary Albuquerque swing club called Chet and Pert's. Well, Harlem wasn't just a physical place, it was a state of mind. The Harlem Renaissance wasn't just a reboot of Greco-Roman Once Upon a Time in Italy. Long before the 14th century, Africans had communities that flourished with creative activity, just like our very own petroglyphs here. Rock paintings depicting domesticated animals provide artistic evidence of the existence of agricultural communities that developed in both the Sahara region and southern Africa by around 7000 BC. In short, we go way, way, way back with this art thing. And just like art doesn't have any borders confining it to one place, neither did this new black identity. New Mexico had its own piece of Harlem Renaissance in poets Anita Scott Coleman and Gene Toomer. Gene Toomer, grandson of America's first black governor, for all my folks in Louisiana, is famous for his 1923 masterpiece, Cain. And Cain kind of looks like, if y'all like The Watchmen, I noticed that the cover of Cain kind of looks like. But anyway, Cain was one of the most important books identified with the Harlem Renaissance for its bending of language and its honest representation of black culture, both in the South and in North America. And at that time, Toomer spent time in a literary community that grew up around Mabel Dodge Lujan and Taos. And in 1935, wrote a manuscript that went unpublished until 2016 titled A Drama in the Southwest. This time he gives us a glimpse into the social world of artists who sought creative and spiritual renewal in Taos, New Mexico, taking his knack for writing about people and places to New Mexico, just like he did in Harlem in poems like 7th Street. Money burns the pocket, pocket hurts, bootleggers in silken shirts, ballooned zooming Cadillacs whizzing down the streetcar tracks. Anita Scott Coleman was a prolific contributor to the Harlem Renaissance, and she lived in Silver City, New Mexico from 1919 until 1925. During that time, she published 13 short stories. Much of Coleman's writing focused on the Southwest, the availability of home ownership for African Americans here, her own Afro-Latino cultural heritage, and knowledge of the Southwest and Mexico, which is where she was originally born, in an essay titled Arizona and New Mexico, the Land of Esperanza, published in The Messenger, a popular political and literary magazine for African Americans, in her poem, America Negra. See if you can hear the influence of New Mexico in her work. America Negra. I am Indian, I am grown old, huddled beside sand dunes, cradled in the lap of a plateau, cacti my shade, sky and land, land and sky. The sky is clear as a mirror, but the land is a painted desert. Anita Scott Coleman. So that's our time. Thank you for joining me, your host, Hakeem Bellamy, for this episode of Harlem by Southwest.